A little bit about Exceptional Individuals. We are the UK's first and only employment partnership for people with dyslexia and neurodiversity. That includes people with dyslexia, autism, ADHD and dyspraxia. But today we're going to be focusing on dyslexia. What is dyslexia? Do you have it? Have you been diagnosed? Do you resonate with it? We're going to be going over some of the facts, some of the false representations, and a little bit about why I personally think it's amazing, and hopefully you will too. When people think of dyslexia, what do they think of? They think of people who can't read, people who can't write, they think of people who have low IQs. Well, that's completely not true. Just to think about some of the most famous people in the world all had dyslexia. So think Winston Churchill, people who suspect he had dyslexia, Jim Carrey, Walt Disney, John Lennon, Steve Jobs, countless others, that people have dyslexia. A lot of the time people think they don't make these connections. And I think, okay, so if someone had dyslexia, how could they become so famous? It's not actually that surprising. And I tell you this because, say if you've got dyslexia, you come up here and your brain works in a different way. And then you get to society that has a certain way of doing things. There's two ways you can go. You can either go one way, which is give up because life's difficult, or you can try and find a different approach around something. And you go around it, and then you solution. Those are the people that end up becoming millionaires, successful entrepreneurs. I totally get dyslexia can seem a disadvantage at the start, but hopefully as we progress on, you'll find different ways and different ways of looking at it, which will hopefully become your unique selling point. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to play a quick video that I made a few years ago about my own personal story with dyslexia and how my perceptions of it has changed over time.
Hey, my name's Nat, and I read in a very unique way. At school, I thought myself stupid. Not only could I not read, I could not retain any information. I never left the bottom sets. It turns out I was not stupid. I was the opposite. I was dyslexic. Dyslexia is like hacking into MI6's computer every time you want to search Google. It can be a right pain in the arse. My spelling skills look like a naughty teenager's text message. This may sound like a negative, but people like Einstein, the father of relativity, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and my personal idol, John Lennon, would disagree. They all had it, you guessed it, dyslexia. Being different may sound like a disadvantage, but I promise you, it's anything but. So, how is dyslexia good? As a dyslexic, it is easy to see beyond the obvious. Finding patterns is second nature. What I lacked in spelling, I more than made up for in my creative storytelling. Old Pablo Picasso and Andy Warhol, other dyslexic alumni, depicted their world how they saw it too. So, let me explain how I got around any issues of dyslexia. When I'm writing, I use coloured paper because the words look so much clearer. I use audiobooks to keep me focused while I'm reading, or if I'm on my computer, I'll get the speech tool to read it out to me.
I can speak to you.
If I'm taking notes, I'll draw pictures and symbols instead of words. And here's where I get really creative. I make up mnemonics for some words. The word said becomes Superman and I dance. Because big elephants can't always use small exits. Or could. You are in the middle of a cold. So, if you have dyslexia, do not worry, just be creative. So you have to read a page twice or 10 times, that's okay. The positives far outweigh the negatives. You need to find out what works for you. Dyslexics, we are trained to find solutions and overcome obstacles. Never give up and be proud of being you. Dyslexic and proud.
Someone with neurodiversity you would call neurodivergent, and this is anyone, say, with dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism, Tourette's, dyscalculia. It's a really broad range, but in essence, it's just a different way that the brain makes connections. So just to give you a few kind of facts to make you feel like you're not alone, because you're definitely not alone. About 1 in 10 people in the UK have some form of neurodivergency. Just think, 1 in 10. Like, if you look around, if you're in an office now, in a school, wherever, there are people that have it. And I think this is surprising to a lot of people, because if you were to ask the schools, or if you ask universities, or you ask employers, how many people in your organisation have dyslexia? They might say 1 or 2, they might not have any formal records. And for me, I think this is because of a few things. People don't recognise dyslexia as a disability. Under the Disability Equality Act, dyslexia is a disability. But like most things in life, it's only a disability if there aren't things in place. So, say you're in a wheelchair, you're trying to get into a building and there's no ramp. That is a disability. You put the ramp in place, you put the lifts, you're just doing your life, you're getting on with it. The same is true with dyslexia. So if there aren't, reasonable adjustments in place, everything feels like an uphill battle. And yeah, it is a disability. But suddenly, if there's reasonable adjustments, if people are understanding, if you've got a manager who understands what makes you, you're just doing your life. 1 in 10 equates to about 6.3 million people in the UK who have dyslexia. That is a massive amount that people can't ignore. Now, what I normally do is kind of really explain to people in the best way possible what is dyslexia. And I think even if you've got dyslexia yourself, it can be quite a tricky thing to explain. A lot of the time, people say, it's when your brain and it's about the reading and the writing, and that doesn't do it justice whatsoever. Dyslexia is about spikes. So where a neurotypical brain, someone without dyslexia, they'd be quite static. So, they're quite good at reading, they're quite good at writing, they're all right at problem solving, they're just quite average. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're dyslexic, you might find reading particularly hard, but your creativity is going to be way up here. Your reading or organisation might be pretty low, but you're really great at problem solving. So essentially what we aim to do is work on your bottom spikes, get them where they should be, and then work on what you're amazing at and help you sell it a little bit more. Because people with dyslexia, we spend our whole life being put down, being told we're dumb, we're stupid, and I think we know it's not true, but as you say it enough, you start to think of it. So it's about kind of like undoing that conditioning. When it comes to reading, most people with dyslexia can read. I think a very, very small percentage of people can't, people who are illiterate. But it is about how the brain processes. So if you see words a lot of the time, no trouble. But if there's a new word, the brain is kind of really struggling to decode it and put it in the right order. I'm going to show, if you look on the screen now, you're going to see this kind of, this really nice GIF. And it kind of, for me, explains really great how people with dyslexia see the world. Now, obviously, as someone with dyslexia, you realise that this isn't actually how you see it, but it's a good way to kind of create some empathy, I find. So maybe take a minute and try and read it, particularly if you do not have dyslexia. The next amazing thing about dyslexia, problem solving. When I say what is one of the great things about dyslexia, it's about how you get to a solution. Someone without dyslexia might go from A to B, and that's fine. Now, dyslexia will go to A to B to C to D to E to F to G to etc. until you get to Y. Now, it's an incredibly long-winded way of doing things, but why are they doing it? Another great example is the London Tube map. So, you may have been on the tube, it's a complete utter mess. But if you're at, say, one end of the central line, I don't know, Bond Street, and you want to get to Liverpool Street, how would you get there? You would just take the central line all the way, easy. But someone with dyslexia might take a completely different route. They may, go all up the Piccadilly, they might go on the Hammersmith and City line, they might even go over the Emirates airline, who you never know. Now, with someone without dyslexia, you might think, why are they doing this? It's not very productive, it's not saving time. But if you just take a moment and speak to someone, you might realise maybe the tube's really congested and this is a quicker way. Maybe it will give you more time to process. Maybe you've got some errands to do on the way. Maybe it's just more of a scenic route which will help you materialise kind of the thoughts in your head. Yes, sometimes life takes you a little bit longer to get places, but the end result is normally of a much higher quality. Problem solving. With dyslexia, sometimes you might always be forgetting things, it takes you so long to figure out an answer, and it absolutely drives you insane. I know it does for me. And this can be quite difficult to explain to the rest of the world. Why does your brain think the way it does? How are there any positives? And a simple tool I use to explain this is a Rubik's Cube. So, you turn them around, you can get all the colours in order, but it takes a long time. If say you got two people, right? And I'm like, alright, Brian, I want you to write the days of the week in order, and Cliff, I want you to do the exact same thing. But the difference is, Cliff has dyslexia, Brian does not. Who's going to get there faster? Probably Brian. And that's not really fair. So just like the Rubik's Cube, every time someone asks you a question, it's kind of like you've got to solve your own algorithm, and you can only answer the question until you get to it. And I think by explaining it that way to people, they can kind of understand why you need a little bit longer. It's not also necessarily a negative though. The end result, you get a finished Rubik's Cube. Note, I can't actually do it. But also, that time of the process, you've had a much more thoughtful answer. We all know people who just talk for the sake of talking, and they never say anything that good. But if you're in a meeting and there's someone who rarely says a word, but when they do say something, it's of quality, you respect them a lot more. It's also like, you ask someone a question, and they go for a draw, and they get the answer out, and they're like, there you go. Now imagine your draw is like all the way up there. It's going to take a little bit longer to get the answer. But imagine if the answer up there is a better quality than the answer down there. It's a long-winded way of doing things, but I do find you will actually end up better for it. People often ask me, how do you turn the disability into an advantage? Now, I'm not saying this is an overnight period. It took me many years before I started being grateful for being different. The best analogy I've got for it is Spider-Man. So, you all know Spider-Man, he's a crime-fighting badass, he dresses in a big spider leotard, shoots webs. But he wasn't always like that. So imagine when he was like Peter Parker, right? Just an average schoolboy going about his day-to-day life. Nothing exceptional about him. And then he gets bit by a spider, diagnosed with dyslexia. And it's a bit tricky because he doesn't really get this diagnosis. He's walking around, he's tripping up, he's getting web all over his face, he's trying to hit bad guys, he's trying to get Mary Jane, it's a disaster. He's not really winning at life. Now, easily he could have gave up here and be like, I give up. But he didn't give up. He got up and he practiced. He learnt about his powers. He learnt about what dyslexia was to him. And, it took time, but now he's shooting webs, he's wrapping up bad guys, he's kicking the Green Goblin. He is someone we look up to. What originally made him a bit of an outcast is now his unique selling point. It's the thing that makes him him, and I don't think people would have him any other way. Now, I know Spider-Man's a cartoon character, but I think that analogy really works for a lot of things in life with people with some differences. To be proud of being different, a lot of people need a role model. They need someone to look up to, someone that says, you know what, I want to be that person. And though a lot of people don't always speak about being different, about having a disability, about having a mental health issue, about coming from a minority background, there is representation out there. I really encourage you to find your own local role model. Maybe it's your parents, maybe it's one of your friends, maybe it's an old teacher. But whatever you do, find someone and let them mentor you. When it comes to different ways of learning, there's lots of ways of doing it. We've obviously got all the examples that you guys have just given, we've got examples that I've said, but it's also nice to know about different learning styles. People always make this assumption, right, that people with dyslexia learn in a certain way, that people with dyslexia hate reading, they hate writing. It's not true. Yeah, sometimes we find it a bit more difficult, but it's okay. Because sometimes we like that challenge. Sometimes it's nice to be able to find something difficult, overcome it, and then this sense of reward is amazing. And when you think about different famous people with dyslexia, they all learn in such different ways. For instance, you've got Walt Disney. Walt Disney was a very visual thinker. He had this great imagination where he was able to visualize ideas, and he was able to delegate and get other people to take those ideas forward and turn it into the amazing Disney empire. You've got John Lennon, who was an auditor. You've got John Lennon, who was an auditory learner. And this means, he learnt with his ears about processing. What I love about John Lennon, right, is him and Paul McCartney, two peas in a pod, they made amazing music, real big Beatles fan, but they learn in very different ways. So John Lennon, dyslexic, Paul McCartney, not. When you bring them together though, the music was incredible. And it's how John learned. He often just kind of heard the songs in his head and was able to play them straight away, where Paul McCartney needed a bit more time to process and write them down. So either way you learn, it's great. The next one is Albert Einstein. Now, people always assume, Einstein, the great dyslexic. He wasn't actually officially diagnosed with dyslexia. It wasn't really a thing there. But a lot of the things he writes about in the journals, looking at his brain, really resonates with dyslexia. Now, how does the smartest person who ever lived, arguably, how is he dyslexic? Well, it's really not that surprising. If you think in a way that everyone else thinks, you're going to get the same answer as everyone else. If you think in a way that's a little bit different, then you're going to get an answer which no one has thought about. It doesn't mean you're always going to be right, it doesn't mean you're better, but it does mean the chances of innovating and finding breakthroughs to problems is far greater. Einstein loved writing, he loved reading, he was really great at maths. He found it difficult, but it never stopped him. And the last one I want to do is Winston Churchill. He was very kinesthetic. This means he learned through speaking. He was a very visual person. A lot of his speeches he had a lot of help with. People always make this assumption, right, that you're born a great public speaker. He had to practice, he had to inspire, he had to engage. Rather than focus on the things he wasn't great at, he focused on what he was, and he was a great empowerer. Love him or hate him, he knew how to deliver a speech. That was his unique selling point. I could sit here all day long and give you tips and tricks about how dyslexia, how to overcome some of the barriers, and how to really highlight the advantages. But the likelihood is you're not going to listen to me. You might remember one or two things, but it affects everyone different. I can tell you how it affects me, but I can't tell it how it affects you. So what I want you to do, in the comments, on your own, in your head, whatever you feel comfortable, write how you work with it. What things have you tried that have made your life a bit easier? How have you worded it which makes you believe and know that it is an advantage? And maybe someone else will read it and it will benefit them as well. I think learning from each other is definitely the best way about going about things. Now some top tips. My first tip is try different teaching styles or different learning styles. Often you're going to think that if someone's trying to teach you something and you're not taking it in, that you're the one that's broken. Absolutely not. It's a teaching style. We all learn in different ways. Some are easier, some are harder. Try asking the teacher to do it in a way that works better for you. And if you're trying to learn yourself and you realise, this book is just not going in my head, maybe watch a video instead. Maybe listen to an audio book. Maybe try reacting it out, try rehearsing it. I can't tell you what works right for you, but what I can say is try enough things and one way will work for your head. Tiny adjustments equal big improvements. A lot of the time, we're not asking you to reinvent the wheel. We're not saying, okay, you're probably going to have to rebuild your head. You're probably going to have to rebuild your house so it, has better acoustics. No. Maybe it's as simple as, having noise-cancelling headphones, having a little bit of mentoring, printing on different coloured paper because your eyes find it easy to adjust. Sometimes the smallest thing can lead to the biggest improvements. Last but certainly not least, positive reinforcements. This is really important. Again, you've probably been told through your life that you're not good enough, you probably haven't had great grades, and this can really lower your self-esteem. You need to big yourself up. If you can't be your own champion, how can you expect other people to champion you? People aren't going to suddenly overnight change how they see dyslexia. You have to be the person to say, yep, I have it, and it's an asset for this reason, that reason, and that reason. Personally, I think talking about it, having champions, listening to other people's stories is the best way as a collective community we can go to overcoming the stigmas of dyslexia. This has kind of concluded our first introduction to what is dyslexia. Hopefully you've learned some great ways of learning. Maybe you kind of look at it a slightly different way now. If there's anything you disagree with, please comment. Let's have a discussion. I think that's going to be the most important thing. And if you're in the UK and you really want some one-on-one support, come to Exceptional Individuals. We're completely free. You can just go on our website, maybe just 3 W's, .exceptionalindividuals.com, and you can book a one-to-one with us, send your CVs, come to our workshops. However you want to engage with us, we'd love to have you. We're ever growing, and you've been beautiful.